Hi, my name is Jason Tyler. I am a virtual nobody who has a lot of experience in the music industry, but on the whole, kind of isn't really doing anything musical right now. And this is a semi unedited, quick response to Samurai Guitarist's video about the AI Beatles song. Um, I want to state that I did listen to the song, not the full version, but just the portion that you talked about. And just through that alone, I definitely understood where you're coming from. Didn't necessarily make me cry or weep in the sense, but I did have a tear for a lot of the reasons that you basically covered. Um, I normally would kind of just maybe write a long comment, but I felt this time around, this is something that I want to have out there. If you see it, great. If not, totally understandable. I just think this is another perspective because there was a lot of stuff that he had unpacked on that and I want to kind of go over some of that stuff. So going into it, if you guys haven't seen that video, please go check it out. It's literally his most recent one at the time of me posting this. I'm probably not going to be able to edit this that much, so I might not have a title card that you can reference. But just go ahead and check his channel. It's one of his most recent videos. Um, if you're not going to do that or this time has passed, I'll kind of give a quick little rundown. There was a guy who took a song that was basically unfinished from John Lennon after he had passed away, and he took some AI software. We're not sure what one yet or necessarily how we did the process, but he took that song, used AI, and he actually added a full Beatles-esque kind of sound that is very reminiscent of how Beatle music was when they were all together. And one of the key parts of it was Paul was actually singing a certain lyric that John had sung. And keep in mind, these guys hadn't been together to perform together in almost a decade. So that never happened in real life. It wasn't like there's some little snippet that we could take and kind of just copy pasta. This is like an actual 100% artificially created thing. And it sounds beautiful. It sounds almost as if a real Beatles song had happened from this. Now, I say almost because there are some little intricacies, right? First off, we know what happened with the Beatles. If you have been alive for, the time that the Beatles existed, you knew about them. If you're born like me and you're only 30 years old and you've only been around for a very small fraction of time on the grand scale of things, you've heard about it through your parents, your grandparents, or just your musical tastes if you are a musician or if you just kind of open your ears and listen to what goes on in the world. So, knowing that the Beatles have not been a thing for a long time, but they were a grand thing in their time, is already going to kind of paint a little bit of a picture. Depending on how much of a Beatles fan you are, you're going to understand a little bit more of the elements that go into a song. And then the second aspect is being a musician. You kind of already know certain ways of how a song is constructed, how it's performed, how the structure goes, and things like that. And you can kind of hear briefly, and this isn't an analytical sense, this isn't in a first listen sense, but you can kind of hear where some elements are clearly not in the traditional stylings of the Beatles. So it also shows that even though this AI is very good, and I mean this, very good at emulating a Beatles vibe, it's not 100%, but it's pretty damn close. And that's kind of an important thing that Sammy G had touched on because it raises a lot of questions now. Kind of how is AI going to change the music scape? And on the lower scale, on the higher scale, in the industry itself, there's a lot of things that are going to happen. So I kind of want to go over that. Already kind of spent a long time kind of just giving some preamble. So now let's kind of get into the meat and potatoes of this. When it comes to AI software is going to rapidly change how we perceive success as a musician. One of the first elements is if you are being sampled, let's say, right? Whether you're a vocalist or a guitarist, or whatever. If you're starting to be sampled consistently and you're showing up and you're hearing a signature style, that's changing a level of success and definition than when you were in the 70s and the 80s and you were doing, tours and you were being asked to play on albums and you were making instructional videos for upcoming musicians. All of those things are now kind of at the wayside. They still happen. They don't happen on the same scale, and especially after the pandemic, the music's landscape is just drastically different. But by having your influence almost be like, for a guitarist standpoint, a plugin on an amplifier app, or on just a digital amplifier, that's kind of gonna start showing the true success a musician has, rather than your digital fan base, your in-person fan base, your album buys, your Spotify plays, all of these things. Now those all tie in together. On the higher end of the scale, that's still going to be critical for people who work in the industry or people who are in labels. On the smaller scale, that sorry, fingers in the way. Hey, little ones, I have my guinea pigs with me, so sorry about that. On the small scale of things, though, that means artists who traditionally wouldn't have much of a chance, whether it's through just the sheer amount of how many musicians are out there, the lack of music scene where they are, or just, like the indie road itself is already a difficult thing, so maybe they just don't have the motivation or the logistics to even get to that kind of phase. It'll really allow these musicians to start progressing, get their name known, and now give them a chance they wouldn't have had otherwise, which is a great thing. A turnaround of that is the high end of the echelon is now going to be very restrictive of the music that they put out. The industry is very old. It has not really changed much since like the 70s and 80s. And you can kind of witness that through both before the pandemic and after. I worked briefly under a label, and I worked with a talent agency, and I was also a talent scout briefly for a little while. So I kind of know on a mass scale how a lot of the things go in the industry. And I'm not really going to touch on that per se, because the next experience I had with that was almost a decade myself. So there is some changes, and there's even more changes when you get on the higher echelon. But I wasn't in some like high degree. I was kind of at your entry level. Going back to the main of it, the labels are going to fight tooth and nail to make sure this stuff stays under wraps, and any sort of digital AI plugin will simplify and kind of just call them that. That's available, whether it's streamed for free or it comes part of a package or whatever it is. That is going to be a tradition. That is now going to become a traditional source of income for that artist, for that label. Now, we need to actually not encourage that. Now, Sammy G touched on a thing about like the Yoko Ono estate owning John Lennon stuff, and then Jimi Hendrix's half sister owning his estate. And it's two dichotomies, because you have one that, was really close to the musician in question and helped inspire their creativity and their music themselves. So yes, they're probably a better choice in what they would want done with their music, versus the other one who didn't really have much of a tie with that musician, and then suddenly had this responsibility thrust upon them. I think that's a genuine concern. And what we need to realize is that if it's going to happen with artists who are alive, then we really need to motivate them to be inspired, to use these plugins, to let us use these plugins, so we can start having a musical shape, a musical soundscape that has no shape anymore. All right, like, they're getting a decent amount of money. They genuinely are. It just all goes back to the label, because it's virtually a loan. To roughly summarize how it is when you're working with a label in a capacity, you're basically using them as a loan, like you go to a bank for a small business or a home. They invest all this money into you, and the promise of the return is how good your album sells, how many tours you can do, and how many seats you fill when you're doing them. That's still unchanged from how it was back in the 30s, 40s, and 50s. The only difference today now is social media plays a really big impact on how well you can get noticed. And in some labels, I mean, there's artists who have already gone on and said, I can't release an album until I have 100 million plays on Spotify or TikTok views or whatever. That's horrendous. I mean, you could be literally stopgapped from your creativity, because you already have an album done, you're already planning on to the next one, and you can't release it, because that's the caveat of working with the label. Some people are okay with that, some people aren't, but that shows right there the soundscape has been changing, and using social media, and in this instance, technology, to help further their financial bottom dollar, but not necessarily the artist's creativity. So come on, girls, stop fighting. So how do we get back to that? Or sorry, how do we change it so we don't have that restriction of, well, now the label owns these things and now it's not free and now it's such a struggle? We need to give more power back to the artists. We need to give them the creative control over their stuff, and we need to incentivize them to be able to release these plugins for us to enjoy and create music, because I'm telling you, in the next 30 years, all right, and this is assuming the best case scenario. It could probably happen even faster depending on how the world economy ends up growing, and kind of like how we kind of get through the rest of this decade, I should say. We are going to have a musical renaissance. The pandemic already showed it. There were so many creative people who were suddenly furloughed, who were suddenly locked indoors and couldn't do anything, and we had an explosion of YouTube content creators, of TikTok content creators, Instagram. We had a whole bunch of musicians who just decided, you know what? I haven't picked up a guitar in years. I'm sitting in the house. I'm going to go and do it, and I'm going to play. And I was really, really hoping that the small 2 years that the pandemic had kind of changed the demographic of everyone being able to create, I thought it was going to help jumpstart that renaissance, but it hasn't. And that's mostly because the economy has kind of restricted us. And I'm speaking mostly on a Western Hemisphere sort of experience on that. But you've seen it. We have witnesses. We have people who got their start during a pandemic and have millions of subscribers and viewers today. So that was through a 2-year period. Now we have technology that allows us to take any artist, living or dead, turn that into something, and someone who has a baseline low level of skill, someone who may not even be necessarily a musician, and I'll get onto that topic in a minute as well, to be able to take these things, mix them all together, and have an end product that is as polished as an industry released album, single, radio play, whatever it is. That's amazing. That's what we want. All right. I know there was a little bit of kickback from all these creators who had been on the platforms for years, if not decades, kind of getting a little salty that all of a sudden these low end people are just jumping up just because everyone's at home and can play. You shouldn't be. All right. Creativity isn't a contest. It's about unit cohesion. All right. It's about us working together, not competition. One thing I've been saying for a long time is music is a group activity. It's an art form that only works when others are doing it and listening to it. If we're competing and we're trying to look at things like it was, the 1930s, and we had to have genre descriptors simply because of racism and all that stuff, that doesn't carry over to today. I mean, yes, in a way it has, and it's a pervasive system issue and why the industry needs to change, but it's baby steps, all right? If it hasn't changed in 70 years, it's not going to change in 2 years. Going back onto that, though, if we have such an influx of new creative people, then having this AI platform be more accessible is going to happen eventually. The faster we usher it in and the more open we are to it, the better it's going to be for everyone. Now, tying back to what I was saying with the estates and stuff like that, if you have an artist who's passed away and their music is, whether they have actual unfinished things stowed away, or we just have inklings through, oh yeah, we have like a handwritten note of a song, but no instrumentation was ever done. Or even if we have literally nothing and we just have an AI program analyze all these different things, all these different songs, all these different elements of an artist. Why would we want to not allow something to flourish and have a potential new song that we would never hear otherwise? Why would we want to restrict ourselves from that? Simply because an estate wants to make money off of someone who's already passed away? Well, again, it's part of that systemic, pervasive issue in the system where it's all about greed and monetary gain. And I get it. For a long time, even now, I'm still kind of focused on, let's reword this. Even now, when I look at things like copyrights, I think there's a lot more that needs to be done so an artist retains their copyrights even after death, even if they're alive and their estate happens and they have kids and all these things. Like, I think a lot of that is still against the artist. At the same time, the free expression of music and creativity needs to be fostered. So, what I think is going to end up happening is that a lot of these AI systems are going to basically release free music. And you might kind of take a step back and be like, oh, well, that's kind of really detrimental to all the artists. Yes and no. Yes, in the sense of they're not getting direct money. But you really wouldn't be able to do that anyway, because like we were kind of talking about earlier, is if these plugins are licensed out to a label, that label can distribute that however they want. And for the most part, that's kind of going to be a bit of a mess. You know, you're going to have people who may have ill intentions who have legally bought the license to make, you know, some horrendous stuff. We've already seen what bots can do on social media platforms like Facebook and things like that. Now imagine someone who with intent, who took a very creative artist and then put something out there that's like just horrendous. And I'm not even talking about sound-wise. I think we all kind of gather where I'm going. Dialing that back, no, it's not really going to hurt them financially because now we're turning people on to music that they wouldn't normally have access to. And you're probably like, well, that's the stupidest thing I ever heard. They have Spotify, they have Amazon, they have YouTube, they have the radio. Yes and no. A lot of caveats to these things. Not a lot of people are experimenting with their genres anymore. Yes, you'll have a Spotify playlist go off and do things, but if you're not paying for Spotify and you hear a song that you really like, it's kind of a bit of a detriment because now you got to hope and pray you're looking at your phone at the right time in order to get it. If you are paying for Spotify, yes, you can go back and do it, but why have to pay for Spotify? What if you just found your brand new favorite artist and you want to hear everything that they have? You want to absorb everything that they have. Yeah, you should support them and you should go and buy an album. But that's not really how things work anymore. We have to hear, we have to test, we have to experience before we buy and we consume. And that's kind of a good thing. I love that a lot of artists now are just releasing their albums for free virtually on YouTube. Yes, it's broken up and you got to build your own playlists and things like that. But you know what? If I hear 3 or 4 good songs out of a John Mayer album that just came out, you know what I'm doing? I'm buying that John Mayer album because I like John Mayer. He's a big influence on me. And he's he's an artist with a lot of things that I like that he does musically speaking. So, to kind of just cover up a little bit of things, right? I definitely think AI-based music is going to change the landscape, but it's going to be a slow process, and we, both as musicians, as creators, and just listeners, have to foster it. We have to allow the little people who are there, who aren't going to make themselves big, or unfortunately won't have the opportunity to get their names out there one way or the other by having the ability to create this music using these AI platforms, or let them create and then someone uses their style and then uses something AI based off of that. It helps get the exposure that we all have to worry about in our early days of being a band, being in a band and being a musician. But now we tie down to another last thing that I want to cover really quickly, right? So there's a genre of music that I really love that I normally wouldn't listen to. It's chillwave, all right? My roommates used to listen to a lot of vaporwave, and I was like, man, this stuff is like so weird. And I didn't even really consider it music for a long time because it's about music editing. You're a mixer. You're an audio engineer. You're not really a musician. Now, there are some artists who actually do that stuff. They create it as a musician. They put it in MIDI, and then they create a song out of it. And that's not diminishing their skills whatsoever. Those are true musicians in the sense of that they play instruments. But for the longest time, I didn't really consider that a genre of music. Then chillwave kind of happened, and after I did some research about how it's very nostalgia and it's supposed to be something related to the triple CP, you know, in the USSR and all that stuff, I'm just like, whatever. It can be propaganda all I want. It sounds good. It reminds me of my childhood in the 90s, like, and I just love it, right? So now we have people, right? Because remember, we're in this musical renaissance because that's where we're eventually going to. We have musicians, girls, come on, I'm wrapping up a point here. We have musicians who aren't really musicians in the sense of they may not know how to play an instrument, they may not have a lot of skill playing an instrument, or they just understand music theory and don't play a musical instrument. They can now take a program that helps them utilize whatever artist that they're inspired by. they hear a song and they're like, you know what, I think I can make that better. Or they hear a vocalist and they're like, man, I know a perfect song that I can compose that voice would suit perfectly. It allows all of us to get this creativity out there, encourage it, foster it, and have it return back. So now we have all this new music coming out of nowhere virtually. And it allows people who wouldn't normally have an opportunity to release music to do it. It's free. We all hear it. You get exposure. And then that opens the door for if you're going to do something like an album. Now, how is that going to work? To be honest, I'm not too sure. I feel if I release an album, right, I want all of my music to be a sort of theme. And that theme only works if you kind of get the whole meaning behind it and you have all the proper instrumentation. And not only that, but you can deliver that experience live. And I feel like that's where we're going to have a disconnect, because it's going to be this free music that you're never going to hear live. But who knows? Maybe a new subgenre of cover bands will exist where they literally just play these mock-up plug-in type creations. And what's wrong with that? There's already cover bands that are playing anyway. I would much rather go see an original band over a cover band. But I would definitely be intrigued to hear a cover band that only plays these songs that have been amalgamations created through plugins, and now we're hearing what Jimi Hendrix would sound like if he did a duet with Eric Clapton, or what John Lennon and Paul McCartney would have done had they recorded stuff in the 80s. Who would not want to hear that? I'm genuinely asking. If there's anyone who doesn't want to hear that, please comment it down, generate some discussion. I want to hear some thoughts on this stuff. So that's overall kind of my response to what Sammy G had brought up. I normally wouldn't do this, but I definitely think this time around, this is something that we all need to start thinking about and start understanding. A musical renaissance is going to happen. It already basically started with the pandemic. A creative renaissance has already started. That's a better way to put it. The industry is going to change. It's going to take a very long time, and it's going to be very small, gradual steps. But we as musicians have the capacity to change it. And when this creative renaissance does happen, do you want to be the salty dog who's sitting back all irritated that everyone's out there listening to music, but they're not buying it, and you're not performing because all these new people are just playing these amalgamation songs? Or do you want to be a part of it? Do you want to foster it? And the best thing is, you can still be an original artist and contribute to this, all right? Because it's about the experience. People are going to always want to see live bands. And whether you play covers of these amalgamations, regular covers, or you do your own original music, wouldn't it be awesome that because you created a couple of these awesome AI tracks, that your name got out there, and when people hear that you have your own original music, now they not only want to listen to you, but they'll actually buy your album. I mean, it's an idealistic dream. I think it's a real one. It's an attainable one. But we got to do it in gradual baby steps, and we have to drop this competition type mentality, and we just got to foster creativity. And that's the best way to look at it. We're fostering creativity to get an end goal of everyone being able to just perform, to play, to hear, and to truly listen to another artist. So, not really sure what sort of discussion this may generate. I might do a follow-up video. I'm not too sure. If you guys are even watching this video, you can tell that I really don't post that much because I haven't done that much musically. So yeah, let me know what everyone thinks about this, please. I'm genuinely serious. If there's any issues, any things like that, let's open this discussion. Let's all talk about it. Thanks.